Hey everyone, it's Matt Harper with the 212 Degree team at Keller Williams Avenues. And I am joined here by Sabrina. And Sabrina is a short-term rental expert. So think of Airbnb, VRBO. You own several properties. You have a property management company that just does specifically the short-term rentals.
Mm-hmm.
And we met through a mutual friend. You actually taught a class that I attended about real estate and short-term rentals. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your story, how you got into the Airbnbs, the short-term rentals, and kind of what that looks like for you today.
Yeah, definitely. It's kind of exciting, actually. So we teach these CE classes to realtors, and we taught our 101st class a couple of weeks ago. And so we're taking a break for the rest of the year on teaching the CE classes. But I actually got into Airbnb on both a personal and a professional level. I used to be a long-term property manager, and I had sort of seen a little gap in the market for furnished rentals. We had picked up a few of those, and there was just such a demand for them. We were renting them out on a monthly basis. And at that point in time, it was probably about 5 years ago, there was really no place for people to go when they needed a temporary stay, whether it be a couple of days, a couple of weeks, or a couple of months. It just wasn't something that was widely available. So I saw this little gap in the market. I happen to live in the West Wash Park neighborhood, and I have a little carriage house on the back of my home, which had been rented out, long term since we purchased the property. And it was just kind of the perfect opportunity. That thing hadn't been touched since about 1983, to take that little carriage house and do a full remodel. And when I put it back on the market, I put it back on as a short-term rental. And I didn't just go monthly with it. I went short-term. So I started renting it out on Airbnb. Our average stay is like 3.5 days essentially. And just it was just something that I really fell in love with. I loved managing the short-term side. It was just becoming popular at that time. So I was getting a lot of questions from clients about, hey, should I do a short-term or a long-term property? I was getting a lot of questions from the realtors that I work with because their clients were asking them about short-term rentals. And that's essentially how I got into it. It was the perfect transition for me to start not only helping to educate people on short-term rental and how to be successful with that, because I'd really figured it out by experimenting on my own property, but to also help others manage their properties and be successful with those.
Yeah, that's amazing. And it's for you, and you shared, right, that you sold your property management for long term. You sold that company and are now focusing only on the short-term rentals.
Yeah, exactly. So I used to be a long-term manager. I sold off that piece of the business just at the end of May this year, so that I could focus on short-term rentals, which is really where my excitement and my passion is. So I love helping people with those.
Yeah, it's an interesting time because the short-term rental market is not new, right? Mm-hmm. The vacation rental homes is not new, but the Airbnb platform, the VRBO platform, has really kind of changed, and this is becoming more commonplace.
Yeah. So I feel like Airbnb was really the platform that changed the industry. Vrbo, they're calling themselves Vrbo now, which I hadn't heard until last year or earlier this year or something like that. They started doing commercials. Vrbo and your sort of vacation rental up in the mountains or over in the beach, those have been around just forever. But what Airbnb did was all of a sudden, now you have a short-term rental right in your neighborhood. And so they brought those to your cities and your neighbors. And that's really what made them the disruptor in the industry. And I think they became really so popular. They started growing, I would say about 5 years ago, and they grew exponentially up until about 2018 or so, the number of short-term listings all over the United States and throughout the country as well. And it's sort of leveled out since then, but I think they became so popular because in the very beginning, Especially if you were first to market, you were just making money hand over fist on these short-term rentals. So
Yeah, without a doubt. And correct me if I'm wrong. The platform, Airbnb platform, started on the West Coast, and it was the Democratic conference that was up in the area, and a couple of individuals didn't have a lot of money, but they did have some air mattresses and some
yeah,
space. So they actually just put it up on, I don't know, Craigslist or something. They put it up and literally gave people an air mattress to sleep on so that they
yeah.
could go to this convention.
Yeah, that was the beginning. The humble beginnings of Airbnb was started in San Francisco, and the founder was renting out an air mattress in his living room in San Francisco, and decided it would be a great way for other people to sort of help supplement their income. And that's really the way Airbnb is being used by a lot of people. They say about 58% of people are using Airbnb to help fund their living expenses versus just extra money or pure investments.
Yeah.
And of course, it's evolved so much since then.
Well, especially if you're in San Francisco, that's a high price point to have a rental, to have a home. It may even be a necessity to just be able to stay afloat in an area like San Francisco.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely.
So with the short-term rentals, I think one of the curious topics is what's going on today. It's a pandemic. It's having such a huge impact across the world. What are you seeing with short-term rentals and the impact that COVID is having?
Yeah. So before I go on, I just want to be clear about some of the terms that I'm using. Short-term rental is essentially defined as a rental that's rented for less than 30 days at a time. And I'll use the term short-term rental and Airbnb very interchangeably, just because that's kind of how people think about it. But I mean, it's been a true roller coaster with the short-term rentals. Of course, in May and April, there was a huge decrease in bookings, 80% down in bookings, and Airbnb laid off 25% of their workforce because Airbnb makes their revenue off of booking fees. And so, one of the strategies that my company did to cope is we went into all of our Airbnb listings and we changed up those settings in there to attract a longer stay. So for the months of March and April, all of our properties were occupied in 4 to 6 week stays at that moment in time. And so once that happened, Airbnb actually evolved and they've transformed their platform to try to target the monthly stay as well as the short-term stay these days. Right. And so March, April were, a little bit sad. Everyone scrambled to get their properties occupied for those 2 months. And then once the stay-at-home orders were lifted throughout, people were just itching to get away. And so what we saw a real shift in the travel time period, where most of the time the summer was the very busiest time. It sort of shifted a few months out. And so our properties, in September and August were earning 60% more than they would have at that same time last year. Wow. It just really blew up, June, July, August through, even through October. Things really blew up with the short-term rental market. And we were renting things out at our premium rates and even more than before. And I think the reason for that is a lot of people dropped out of the short-term rental market in April and May. 58% of people are using short-term rentals to sort of supplement their income. People needed to do something. So people either converted their properties to long-term rentals or they sold them off. And so we saw a decrease in supply of short-term rentals. But then once stay-at-home was lifted, people, started traveling locally more than they ever had before. And all of a sudden demand had spiked up to more than it normally was because everyone was so tired of being in their homes. Mm-hmm. And I should specify that the properties that we manage are located in Denver. So we don't have any mountain properties. So I'm speaking to what's happening in Denver, but my understanding is it's the same sort of thing happened up in the mountains as well.
Yeah, if you don't feel comfortable to get onto an airplane and travel to, Florida or Texas or California, wherever you were going to go this year, well, gosh, stay in locally in a cool kind of hip spot in Denver or somewhere locally or up in the mountains seems a whole lot more attractive than getting on an airplane and being surrounded by a bunch of other people.
Absolutely. And it's more attractive than going into a hotel where you share a lobby and elevators and common spaces with people as well. So, Airbnb is really seeing a boom in travel simply because of COVID. Now, I can tell you that this week, I feel like it changes weekly. This week, things have changed a little bit. I think we all know that here in Colorado and throughout the country, we're seeing cases spike. And so this week, we've seen people cancel reservations, and we've even seen a handful of people cancel because the person they were visiting were diagnosed with COVID, and so they can't visit them anymore, or because they themselves were exposed and they can't travel anymore. So I suspect we'll see another sort of down period coming up here pretty soon. And the best thing you can do as an Airbnb host, since we're starting to see this happen, is go in and change your Airbnb settings to attract those longer stays. Put a steep discount on a 30-day or more stay so that you can keep your property occupied. And then, other things become important when people are staying for a long time. The Wi-Fi is super important. A lot of people are working remotely. So make sure you highlight any features that make it great for people to work from home, or even if you have laundry, parking, those sort of things all of a sudden become very important.
Yeah, dramatic different needs if I'm going to be there 3 days versus 6 weeks.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I'm not going to pack a suitcase full of 6 weeks worth of clothes. I don't know if I own 6 weeks worth of clothes.
Yeah. So laundry becomes important, parking becomes important, that sort of thing.
Absolutely. So, and I think an asterisk to all of this to say COVID is changing weekly, daily, sometimes even hourly with
Absolutely.
What's going on. So information's relevant today, right now, may not be in another, week or so as things continue.
Exactly. And the thing that makes it tricky for a host is that most people right now are looking for a very flexible cancellation policy because things are so uncertain. But as a host, that means you block your calendar and then someone can cancel at the last minute, right, which leaves you empty. So it's a tricky balance to try to find.
Yeah, without a doubt. It's blazing that trail. It's kind of being that pioneer on the front end of it to see, okay, what's working, what's not working, and what are the constant changes that we're going to see in all of this, right?
Mm-hmm.
So now, if I'm just a regular homeowner, so I don't own an Airbnb, I don't have a short-term rental, what are some things that I should consider when wanting to explore and get into this? Do I go buy a house with a carriage house? Do I go buy a duplex? Do I go buy something in the mountains? Where should somebody start this journey with short-term rentals, Airbnb?
Yeah. So, what I recommend is looking at an area where you enjoy it or where you like it. Or if you're planning on buying your personal home, of course, look for a place that works for you. And then once you find your location, check to find out what the rules and regulations are with Airbnb, because no matter where you are, even up in the mountains, we're seeing more and more restriction on Airbnb rentals. And so in the mountains, things that we're seeing is we are seeing that they are requiring local points of contacts, which, then you would need a property manager in place, which then you have to do some math to see how that works out for you. Right. In Denver Metro, we're seeing that many of the metros require that it's your primary residence. So that means, here in Denver, an ADU is perfectly acceptable for a short-term rental, but in Boulder, they're more strict and it's more complicated. So the rules and regulations are very city-specific, county-specific. So I would check to see what you're allowed to do before you plan on it. And be aware that they may update or change those rules as time goes on. So you should always have a backup plan and sort of a comfort level with not having to depend on that income in order to pay your mortgage. So that's the first thing that I would look at. And then, sort of location, highest and best use for that property. There's definitely tools out there to help you estimate what you would earn for rentals. AirDNA.co is a great one that I recommend.
Yeah, I've browsed on that site, the AirDNA site, just for some analytics, which is my love language. I love looking at the numbers and analyzing what it tells in a story. I want to go back to that first point here real quick, because the
Oh, it looks like we might have lost Matt here. All right. Hopefully he comes back soon. There he is. There you are.
All right, here we go. All right, technology. So back to my point that these aren't really just suggestions on how to go about it. I've known of some real estate agents, and again, when I say no, I've heard the story, I've seen the post, on the news sources. There's been some folks that have gotten arrested and been charged for running illegal short-term rentals.
Yeah. Denver has taken some unprecedented moves to try to sort of force people into voluntary compliance on the primary residence rule is what we have here in Denver. And just to clarify, they were running short-term rentals that the city suspected were non-primary residences, but it hasn't been proven. They have dropped the felony charges, and the felony charge was actually for not for running the Airbnb itself, but for lying and saying that it was a primary residence. And
Right.
So at this point in time, everyone's charges have been dropped. And I believe they negotiated a misdemeanor of some kind.
Yeah, I still don't want to be the test case that determines what's going on, right?
No, exactly. And the primary residence definition here in Denver is very subjective. So, the city of Denver will send you an affidavit if they have any question as to whether or not the property is in fact your primary residence. And a lot of people are afraid to sign those because It is so subjective.
Yeah, how do you define primary residence? Is it how long am I staying there? We've got clients that are in the airline industry and they travel for their job.
Mm-hmm.
So how much are they at home versus how much they're out on the road? What does this look like? I think anytime we have new technology like this and a new push and a new wave, the laws are always going to be far behind the technology.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And in Denver, you don't have to be in your house for a certain period of time. You can travel a lot for work, but other cities have different definitions of primary residence. So, in Boulder, you have to be there 50% of the time. So it's really important to understand your specific definitions when you go to do an Airbnb.
Yeah, so a lot of research on the front end, because you don't want to purchase a new property and find out on the back end, this doesn't work.
Yeah. I've had people call me and be very disappointed later on.
So with your property management company, most property management companies, when I say most, I'm talking about long-term rentals, right? Mm-hmm. So I have property that I own out of state. I have a property management company that manages it because I'm not picking up the phone at midnight to deal with whatever's going on in Detroit. So they charge 10%, but it's a little more involved when you have a short-term rental management from that aspect.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you're looking at a short-term rental, you're looking at a turn every 3.5 days. I always tell people you're not just a landlord, you're all of a sudden in the hospitality industry. So you need to react to people 24 hours a day, respond very quickly. If there's some sort of an issue at the house, hey, I lost my key or the door code isn't working, doesn't matter what time of the day it is, someone needs to be there to get that person into the property or help them get into the property. So it is a very time consuming thing. There are certainly different levels of property management that different companies offer. Your typical full service company, depending on where you're located, is going to be anywhere between 25% and 55%. 25% is very common in the cities. 35 to 55% is what you can expect in the mountains. I want to specify that my company, we operate in a bit of a different way. We are not a full service property manager because we cater to the clients here in Denver that are typically on their property. Mm-hmm. So someone doesn't need necessarily a full service manager. So we charge 10%, but we take away about 90% of the work. We do all of the guest communications, all of the marketing for the property, handle any damage claims, and schedule your cleaners for you. Basically, as the homeowner, the only thing you need to do is check up on that property every now and then. You live there, hopefully, so no problem. And then, make sure that you maintain the outside like you normally would because it's your own home. So our service is slightly different. It's catered to the rules and regulations in the Denver metro area. And then we'll also do 30-day plus rentals where the homeowners are not on site.
Well, now a lot goes into it, but the payoff should be there, theoretically, right? We'll take COVID aside.
Yeah.
So what kind of income potential, are we looking at for short-term rental, and maybe just for comparison standpoint versus a long-term rental ownership?
Sure. Yeah. So, this is a really loaded question because it does always depend, of course, on your property, your location, the highest and best use for your space, and depending on what you've got there. But I'll just walk you guys through the example of my little carriage house because I think it's a really good demonstration of how well a short-term rental can do, especially when it is part of your primary residence. So my little carriage house, it's 1 bedroom, 1 bath. It's about 500 square feet, completely remodeled. It's a good walkable location in West Wash Park. So we get a lot of different reasons for people traveling to the area. But if I were to rent that out unfurnished long-term, I'm looking at about, $1,300 a month or so. I can do a monthly rental on that as well if I was to go monthly with it versus short term. I'm looking at probably between $1,800 and $2,000 a month on that property. And when I go short term, my average stay is 3.5 days. My take home after the cleaning fees that I pay out, I collect them, of course, and then I pay them right out to my cleaners, and supplies and things like that. I'm looking at around $2,500 a month on average. So, wow. You're looking at easily double on your primary residence. But the reason those numbers are so good on a primary residence is because I'm not paying a 25 to 55% management fee. And I'm also maintaining my own home. So, those costs I already have no matter what. I'm already paying for cable and internet. So a lot of the costs that would sort of dig into your bottom line on a short-term rental, I don't have on my primary residence. So what I always tell people is if you're using a property manager that's full service on a short-term rental, plan on taking home about 50% of what your top line revenue looks like. Whereas on a long-term rental, that's, very, very different. You're taking home 85 to 90% of what your top line revenue is.
Well, a lot more involved, obviously, with the short term, because again, as you mentioned, in the hospitality business, you got to think about it differently.
Yeah.
I know when we travel and stay at the short-term rentals, the Airbnb, it's nice to have a book as to what's happening in the area. I've got to connect into Wi-Fi. I want to know how their TV works, and everybody's got a different TV setup for streaming. It's not always the same as I have at home.
Yeah. Yeah. So I definitely recommend a very robust guidebook in your home. And it will, if you're a host, it will help you, number one, make your guests feel welcome. People are always looking for information, but it also saves you a lot of time because they aren't messaging you to find out the answers to those questions. It's right there for them as a resource. And I think people appreciate that. People want to travel. They don't want to have to contact their host 10 times a day to figure out what's going on, but they also need a little bit of guidance.
Yeah, without a doubt. I hear this both from folks that are thinking about long-term rental, property ownership, and of course short term. What happens when the guest or the tenant damages my house and destroys everything? One, you can share that I don't know the numbers. I'm going to make an assumption. The number is pretty low as an overall percentage of how many Airbnb properties get damaged by the renter, the guest.
Yeah.
And then what kind of security does a homeowner have?
Yeah, so that very much depends on the booking platform that you use. So through Airbnb, they have a damage resolution process where as long as you've provided pictures and invoices for repairs, you'll do very well through that damage resolution process. Now, they just updated their terms and conditions on October 30th, and I'm still sort of learning to navigate those changes, but I have noticed that it's a little bit more, there's some bugs in it because you put in, when you have a damage claim, you put in a request through Airbnb, it goes first to the guest and the guest agrees to pay or not. But what I'm seeing is there's a little bit of a bug where even if the guest wants to pay, they can't figure out how to right now. So Airbnb is, one of the things that I've learned is that they are a very experimental platform and they do a lot of beta testing and a lot of changes. And so my platform looks different from your platform, looks different from the other person's platform. So it's not terribly consistent, but they are generally very good about paying for like the items here and there that get damaged, extra cleaning costs, things like that. But to be very clear, you do need to notify your homeowner's insured how you're using the property, because if you have a major claim, like somebody burns down the house or something along those lines, your homeowner's insurer will not cover you if you haven't explained to them that you're using the home as a short-term rental. So just be sure to contact your insurer to make sure you're covered.
Yeah, have that phone call early in the process with your insurance company, because wouldn't be probably a more frustrating scenario with, the guest didn't follow the rules, burnt down the house, and your insurance company says, you were operating this as an Airbnb. We didn't know, therefore we're not covering it because it's not what we were insuring.
Yeah.
Yeah. So overall, the percentage, I'm guessing, is pretty low as far as how often that properties really get damaged.
Yes. Yeah. So I can say, we've been managing short-term rentals for 6 years. We have maybe had 10 claims, and most of them are small. Most of them are under $100. Maybe there was some extra cleaning required or something along those lines. I think we had one, the largest one we had was $1,800, and that got paid. Someone backed into a garage door. Now, part of the reason we have so few claims is because we focus on the properties that would never be a party house. Most of our stays allow anywhere from 1 to 4 people at the very most. Most of them are 1 to 2 people stays. So people don't come to have a party when you can only fit 2 people in the house.
Right. Well, another security piece that's built in is this kind of this two-way rating system that Airbnb has. So when I go to an Airbnb, I rate the property and the host. How was it? Did the house smell like smoke? Was it clean? What did this look like? Are they a good host? And the host actually can rate the guest, correct?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And so Airbnb really depends on that, as they call it their social proof, to make everybody feel comfortable about it, because Airbnb really allows guests to book properties instantly, and they really encourage hosts to allow for that. So you don't get a lot of chance to pre-screen your guests or talk to them before they show up. And the guests can, of course, ask you a lot of questions as the host if they want to, but most of them don't. And they really use that rating system and depend on it. So one of the best things you can do for yourself as a host is make sure that you have some really good ratings, and make sure that people understand that your ratings affect how your business runs, and vice versa. Give honest reviews for people.
Yeah, and if I consistently leave Airbnb properties damaged and destroyed, that shows up, and the next host can choose not to rent to me. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. So if you book a property and the host does not feel comfortable with you because of reviews or ratings, they can contact Airbnb and have that reservation canceled.
Yeah, so where the hotel industry doesn't have that communication quite the same way. So if you're going to Marriott hotels and then you go to a Hilton hotel and then you go to whomever the other hotels are owned by, they don't have the same communication system for this kind of social proof and saying, yep, this person took care of the property, everything was good and as they were supposed to.
Yes, yeah, and that's not the only thing Airbnb is doing these days. They've added some different filters on listings. So if you are under the age of 25 and you're trying to rent an entire home rental for one day, oftentimes they'll block the booking because they suspect you might want to have a party.
Doing what 25-year-olds do.
Exactly. And they were really strict over Halloween this year. They had an incident where 5 people were shot the previous year at a Halloween party. And so this year they weren't allowing any bookings over the weekend of Halloween by guests who didn't have at least 3 positive reviews. And so it was, sort of an experiment, I think, for Airbnb. A lot of hosts were not pleased with that. A lot of guests were not pleased with that. But it certainly was a way to prevent trouble. And so Airbnb is filtering on their own end as well these days.
Well, I think the platform is going to continue to evolve because it is a platform that allows for the evolution of what's going on, what a guest want, what a host want, and how does this continue to move forward. It's a natural process to evolve very quickly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, it looks like Matt might have frozen again. There he goes. I do want to mention real fast is that Airbnb is actually going public very soon here. I don't know the exact dates off the top of my head, but they're going public in the next month or so. The goal is to do it in 2020. Okay. Yeah.
So for somebody to take advantage of an IPO and get in on that.
Yeah. And one of they're actually offering their hosts a special into the shares. So if you are a host, look for an email from Airbnb inviting you to opt in or opt out of that.
And if you're not a host, get to be a host pretty quick, get the discount, become an overnight millionaire, whatever that looks like. So as I was going to share here is the technology, again, kind of went goofy on me with my camera. I'm a big proponent of folks leveraging real estate to build wealth. More millionaires are made in this country through owning real estate than any other source. So Airbnb, long-term rentals, whatever that looks like, leveraging real estate to help increase net worth and revenue streams can be a powerful piece for your financial well-being. So, for your scenario, Sabrina, I'm assuming that since you sold off the other business for long-term rentals, that this has been a good piece for you being both an owner and a property manager for short-term rentals.
Yeah, it really has. And it's really one of the reasons that I love short-term rental. The carriage house and renting it out short-term was a real surprise to us, unexpected income that we, didn't expect to have. And it was really easy to sort of tap into an asset that we already owned. We bought it as a primary residence, so we weren't required to put 25% down on it. And it's just a really great way for people to leverage real estate with the short-term rental on your primary residence. And then you have the flexibility also that if you want your mother-in-law to come stay back there, or in your basement or in the room that you rent out, it's so easy to just block the days on your short-term rentals. So yeah, I've loved seeing it. I've had clients who never expected the income from short-term rental. I had one client who, she was 60 years old. She'd always dreamed of being an actress, and the extra income from her Airbnb gave her enough income to travel back and forth from Colorado to LA and pursue that dream. So it's a lot of fun.
Well, it's amazing what additional income can do for an individual, right? If we've got an extra income source, COVID hits and I'm not allowed to work, my job is kind of shut down. Well, gosh, having another income source is certainly going to help.
Mm-hmm.
So it looks like we've got a question here from a friend of mine, Amy. Amy, I appreciate you watching. Says, what does Airbnb when STRs are listed in counties that don't allow them or they don't have the proper permits?
Yeah, so Airbnb, it's complicated because Airbnb is quite resistant to helping to regulate short-term rental. And depending on what they've negotiated with your municipality. So in Denver, you have to have a short-term rental license. And so there's a place in Airbnb to put in that license. In some areas, they require that you put something in that field before you can rent out, before they'll list your property. City of Denver is actually just right in the middle of proposing that any rental platform or any person listing a short-term rental, even on behalf of someone else, that if they don't, that rental doesn't have an active license, that platform or that property manager will be fined $1,000 per day. And so that was the big discussion in the last short-term rental advisory committee meeting for the city of Denver with Airbnb, who participates in these meetings, on how to handle that. And of course, at first, Airbnb, the way city of Denver had structured it, Airbnb was very unhappy with it. But they've restructured it. It's in a way that Airbnb can work with it. So in Denver, there is going to be some sort of regulation on the side of Airbnb.
Yeah, it's again constantly evolving. Is the laws, the rules, the restrictions are changing. And I like Airbnb. I like staying at Airbnbs. It makes it pretty nice. Obviously, Sabrina likes Airbnb. Let's be honest. There are folks that don't love Airbnb. You know, I can imagine the hotel chains don't love Airbnb. Sometimes your neighbors don't love the fact that you have an Airbnb. So there's going to be opposition to this, no matter what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the best thing you can do is, if you are an Airbnb host, make sure that you talk to your neighbors, you explain to them that you intend to be a responsible host. Part of the primary residence requirement sort of ensures that you're a responsible host, because you won't have people come into your own home and be loud and disturb your neighbors and destroy your own home. So that was kind of the balance that City of Denver had struck, and many other cities in Denver Metro are doing that as well. But yeah, talk to your neighbors. And like Matt said, this is ever evolving. So the short-term rental advisory committee, actually, the next meeting is December 8th, and there are proposals coming out to make 2 Airbnb licenses here in Denver, one for a primary residence and one for a non-primary residence. So if there are investors interested in non-primary resident Airbnbs, that would certainly be the case with a duplex these days. If you live in one side and rent out the other side is not considered your primary. Or if you just want to buy a property and rent it out, I would advise that you log on to that short-term rental advisory committee so that you can understand what's happening. And even you're allowed to give public comments on that meeting as well.
Yeah, so ultimately do a lot of research, be involved, stay connected to it, because as it changes, you don't want it to, 1, change without your voice, 2, change and ultimately restrict your plan with real estate and what that looks like for you.
Yeah, exactly.
So Sabrina, individuals that are watching the video, if they wanted to connect with you, get more information, learn a little bit more about your company, learn about becoming a host, becoming a real estate investor that way, how would they get in touch with you?
Yeah, so my real passion is helping people be successful with their Airbnbs. So we don't just offer management; we offer consulting and educational services as well. The name of the company is B&B Excellent, and you can email me at sabrina@bnbexcellent.com, or you can call the office at 303-222-2116, or if you're watching this Facebook Live, put a comment on the Facebook Live and I'll reach out to you. But I'm pretty easy to get a hold of. Email, phone, Facebook, however you want to do it.
Perfect. So let's see. Amy's got another comment here. Working for Jeffco Planning and Zoning, and short-term rentals have been a big topic of conversation. So trying to make permits easier to obtain, but as a zoning inspector, have to deal with the back end of the rules when rules aren't followed. So excited to see them moving forward with permitting. So also, Sabrina, Amy might be a good resource for you as well, working there for Jeffco Planning and Zoning.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for that input. It's so hard to keep up with all of these things, and if you need to find out what your rules and regulations are, call your zoning department or your excise and licensing department. And a lot of times this information is posted on the city and county websites as well.
Yeah. Well, again, hey, thank you so much, Sabrina. I appreciate this. I'd love to do more of these in the future with you if we can, if that's acceptable to you.
Yeah, I would love that.
So for those that are watching, if you've got specific questions around Airbnb, you want us to talk about something specific, drop a comment in, shoot a message, an email out to us, and we'll connect and we'll get those conversations going. So again, Sabrina, thank you so much. I so appreciate your time.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, Matt.
All right. Y'all take care.
Have a good one.